For 20 years, I was invisible. At 62, I finally stood up and showed my children who I really am. One missed art show changed everything. What I did the next morning shocked everyone. Hello, dear friends. Before I begin, let me ask you something. Please, give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments, from which city are you listening to my story? Your words mean more to me than you know. I was 62 years old when I finally dared to call myself an artist. For decades, I had painted in secret, in the basement of the house where I raised 3 children, folding laundry with one hand while brushing color onto canvas with the other. My husband Hamie used to joke that our furnace room smelled more of turpentine than of heating oil. When he died 2 years ago, the silence of the house became unbearable, so I filled it with paint. That night, I stood in the center of a small Seattle gallery, wearing the golden dress I had bought especially for the occasion. My first solo exhibition. My name, Gal Gibson, printed in bold letters across the invitation cards I had addressed by hand 3 weeks earlier. Each envelope carried not only an invitation, but the fragile hope of a woman who wanted her children to finally see her, not only as mom, but as someone with a dream. The gallery was alive with soft voices, clinking glasses, polite nods. Strangers admired my seascapes. Neighbors congratulated me timidly. My former art teacher, Amy, beamed with pride as she hovered near the largest canvas. Yet 7 front-row chairs, carefully reserved for my family, remained empty. I checked my phone. A message from Patrick, my eldest, arrived first. Running a bit late, Doris's mom surprised us with a spa package for the whole family. You understand, right? Rain check. My throat tightened. A spa day. My son had traded my 20 years of hidden paintings for eucalyptus steam and cucumber water. A second buzz. It was Eileen. So sorry, Mom. Emergency client call. I'll try to stop by later this week. Love you. The word love stung like vinegar on an open wound. Then Max, my youngest, the one I thought understood. Christina's ex is in crisis. She needed me tonight. We'll make it up to you, I promise. 3 excuses, 3 absences. The clock read 7:47. The event had begun at 7 sharp. Martin, the gallery owner, tapped the microphone gently, ready to introduce me. My phone slid into my purse with a decisive snap. I walked up to the podium, my heels echoing on the wooden floor. Faces turned toward me, friendly, expectant. I should have spoken about technique, about inspiration, about how painting rescued me from grief. Instead, my gaze lingered on those 7 empty chairs, and something crystallized inside my chest, sharp, cold, undeniable. Thank you for being here, I began, my voice steadier than I felt. These paintings represent over 20 years of work I created in silence while raising 3 children. Tonight was meant to be not just about art, but about family, to show the people I love most who I truly am beneath the roles they assigned me. I paused, my eyes fixed on the vacant row. But sometimes, I said, the greatest gift you can give someone is your absence. It clarifies so much. A hush spread across the room. Polite applause followed, but under it, I could feel an unspoken ripple. Something had shifted in me, something that could not be undone. That night, as I greeted strangers who bought my work, I realized my children had already written me out of their lives. They just didn't expect me to notice. If you only knew what decision I made the very next morning, you'd understand why nothing in our family would ever be the same again. When the last glass of wine had been poured and the gallery lights dimmed, Amy helped me gather the untouched rose of crystal. "Beautiful evening, Gal," she said softly. "It was exactly what I needed," I replied. And to my own surprise, I meant it. At home, I placed the 3 text messages on the kitchen table beside the leftover exhibition brochures. They glowed against the wood like fragments of betrayal. My phone buzzed again. Another apology from Patrick, then one from Eileen, then Max. Each of them promised to make it up to me. But love, I realized, cannot be rescheduled like a dental appointment. I let the phone ring until the sound became almost soothing, like a distant alarm I no longer needed to answer. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air like tiny rebellions. I brewed tea and sat in silence. For once, it wasn't loneliness I felt. It was clarity. I remembered the countless moments when my presence had been optional in their lives. The birthday lunch Eileen canceled because her boss called. The Christmas Patrick spent with his wife's family while I sat alone with leftovers. The school play Max forgot to tell me about until the following week. One absence leads to another until it becomes habit, until it becomes identity. By mid-morning, I made a decision. I opened my old address book and flipped to the number of Mabel Foron, Jaime's attorney. She had guided me through the paperwork after his death with patience and quiet authority. When she answered, her voice was brisk. "Gal, what can I do for you?" "I need to change my will," I said without hesitation. There was a pause, then the scratch of her pen. "Tell me when you can come in." I hung up the phone and pressed my palm against the cool surface of the table. It wasn't anger I felt. It was liberation. For 62 years, I had lived as if my worth depended on being indispensable. But what if my legacy didn't belong to those who had already taken me for granted? What if, instead, it could belong to women like me, women who had been invisible, who painted in basements, who deserved light? The gallery had proven something. My work had value. My voice had value. And I was done teaching my children that my needs were optional. What I told my lawyer that afternoon would leave my children stunned and furious when they finally discovered it. By 10 the next morning, Seattle wore that familiar pewter sky, the kind that makes you check the time twice because the light never quite commits. I put on a navy dress that doesn't pretend to be anything other than practical, slipped my phone into my purse face down, and drove to the brick building where Mabel Foran keeps her law office. The elevator smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old carpet, a scent I always associate with institutions that prefer neatness over feeling. I used to think that was a virtue. Now I am not so sure. Mabel's assistant offered water, which I declined because my hands were already too restless. I didn't need another thing to grip. When Mabel stepped into the lobby, her silver hair was smoothed into its usual glossy coil, her glasses resting low on her nose in that way that implies focus rather than age. She took my elbow, not because I needed help walking, but because she's one of those women who believes in the tiny courtesies that keep the world from tipping over. "Gal," she said, the single syllable both greeting and diagnosis. "Come in." Her office is a museum of the sensible. Leather chairs, a walnut desk, framed degrees, and a single watercolor of Puget Sound that's more competent than inspired. Jaime liked that painting. He said it looked reliable. I remember thinking reliability is a fine quality in a mortgage or a highway bridge. In art, it feels like a locked door. "I need to change my will," I said, settling into the chair opposite hers. I didn't soften it with a preface or apology. Something about last night had burned away my habit of cushioning the truth with pleasantries. Mabel's pen was poised, but her eyes were on me. "All right, tell me why, and then tell me what." "Because I've spent years teaching my children that I am optional," I said. The words surprised me with their steadiness. "I won't teach them that lesson anymore, not in life, and certainly not in death." She waited, measuring my voice against my posture, checking for fissures. Lawyers learn the art of listening the way surgeons learn the weight of a scalpel. I want to establish a charitable trust, I continued, funded by my home, Jaime's policy, our investments, and my art. Its purpose is to support women over 50 who are serious about pursuing art after years of caregiving or work that made them invisible. I want Amy Patterson as the primary trustee. She understands both discipline and mercy. The foundation's name should be plain, the Gal Gibson Arts Foundation. Mabel's pen began to move, neat block letters that looked like they could survive a flood. All assets to the foundation, she asked? No specific bequests to your children? No, I said. Not financial ones. You're certain this isn't punitive? Mabel's tone was neutral, a clinician checking blood pressure. It's a question I'm obliged to ask. It's protective, I answered, and I felt that truth root itself the moment I spoke it. Protective of the woman I am now and of the women I want to help. Punishment is about someone else's discomfort. Protection is about boundaries. She pushed her glasses up the bridge of her nose. Tell me about last night, she said gently, which is to say, give me context a court would recognize if it came to that. So I told her, not dramatically, not with flourishes, but like a ledger, the invitation cards addressed by hand, the 7 chairs reserved, the messages that arrived like little exhalations of indifference, spa day, client call, crisis belonging to someone who had never met me. I told her how the applause felt like a blanket laid over a scream. I gave dates and small facts because the body remembers details the mind would rather excuse. The time on the gallery clock, the way the stemware caught the light and held it like a breath, the expensive hollow quiet of the front row. When I finished, Mabel set her pen down. Your mental state? She asked. Sleeping, eating, decision-making? I slept last night, I said, surprised to realize it was true. I ate toast and tea this morning, and I drove here without crying once. I've made harder decisions in the cereal aisle. One corner of her mouth lifted. Competent, decisive, self-aware, she murmured, noting it down in lawyer shorthand. All right, let's discuss structure. For the next 40 minutes, we engineered a future. The house would be held in the trust, maintained as a small gallery and studio space with a portion reserved for classes. Oil basics, drawing, color theory, even a free Friday session called First Brush for women who hadn't touched paint since high school. Scholarships would be modest but recurring, supply stipends, a rotating mentorship with working artists, travel grants to attend exhibitions or residencies. Amy would oversee programming with a small advisory board of women over 50, the age at which, in America, a woman becomes a fog to anyone who isn't paying attention. What about your personal effects? Mabel asked. Jewelry, furniture, family photos? Photos get copies. 1 set for each child, I said. They're not wealth, they're witness. The jewelry is mostly sentimental and modest. A few pieces can be designated if they ask, but I'm not crafting a scavenger hunt. The furniture should stay with the house as part of the gallery's atmosphere. I want the space to feel lived in, because women like me are always told to tuck our lives out of sight. I want the opposite. And your paintings? I glanced at the blue folder in my purse, the one holding photographs of the seascapes and abstracts, and the 12 self-portraits that still tremble when I look at them. The foundation can sell selected works to fund programs, I said, but a portion should remain in the house. The art should testify to the life that made the house worthy of being more than an address. Mabel nodded. There will likely be blowback, she said, not unkindly. You know this. I expect it, I replied. My children are good at negotiating terms when love becomes inconvenient. phone on Do Not Disturb?" she asked, glancing at my bag. "Face down," I said. "It's the new posture of my heart." She smiled at that, not because it was clever, but because it was accurate. Then she went practical again. "We can draft today, notarize this afternoon," she said. "I'll need your signatures, and if you want things filed immediately, we'll run it through with an expedited stamp. You should also write a brief statement, your intentions in your own words, not because the law requires it, but because future you may be grateful for a letter from present you." "That's a kind instruction," I said. "It's a professional habit," she corrected. "Kindness is just good law practiced in human time." I looked out her window then. The sky had shifted from pewter to a softer kind of gray, the sort that lets you remember light exists even when it's hiding. "Make it today," I said. "All of it. I want my signature in ink before sunset." "Gal," Mabel said, her voice the low register of respect. "So be it." While she buzzed her assistant and gathered forms, my phone vibrated once on its face, the small hum of a familiar name trying to pull me back into the older version of myself. I didn't flip it over. Let the past leave a message. I had an appointment with the woman I intend to be. If you think ink is harmless, you've never watched it change the shape of a life. And if you think my children would accept it quietly, you don't yet know what arrived on my doorstep before the papers were dry. They brought in the notary just after lunch, a woman with meticulous nails and a stamp that thunked like a small gavel. There's a choreography to legal formality I hadn't appreciated until that afternoon. The sliding of pages across polished wood, the slow, deliberate reading aloud of sections that will govern what survives you, the eye contact between women who understand that certainty is its own kind of shelter. I signed my name over and over, and with each loop of the G, I felt something uncoil inside me, like a rope that had been holding a boat too tightly to its dock. I initialed margins, dated lines, and placed my palm against paper that would outlast both my grievances and my breath. Mabel narrated the steps the way nurses narrate procedures to reassure a patient, not infantilizing, just companionate. "Trust established," she said gently, sliding the final sheet toward me. "House deed transfer executed upon death, with interim provision for use as living gallery and studio during your lifetime. Amy Patterson named as primary trustee, succession plan documented. Allocation, policy proceeds, brokerage accounts, sales of selected artworks, statement of intent appended." We paused to let the notary perform her final ritual, the careful stamping and the tiny exhalation of satisfaction that follows a clean impression. It is a small thing to witness a stamp kiss paper, but sometimes the smallest things are the ones that remake you. While the assistant made certified copies, Mabel and I discussed contingencies. What if Amy were unable to serve? What if the house required unexpected repairs? How to word the section allowing the foundation to host monthly gatherings so women could speak their dreams aloud without apology. When she said monthly gatherings, I pictured a long table in my dining room, tea kettles singing, palettes drying on the counter, a smudge of ultramarine on someone's wrist. Community is simply presence, multiplied. My phone vibrated again, impatient. I refused it once, twice, and then answered not with my voice but with a small act of respect for myself. I powered it down. The silence felt like someone opened a window. "I'll courier your copies this afternoon," Mabel said, "but I recommend you take this set with you now." She slid a crisp folder across to me, the kind I used to buy for the children before the first day of school. I accepted it with both hands. "I'm seeing Amy next," I said. "I won't assign her a role without looking her in the eye." "As it should be." Mabel removed her glasses, let them hang from a thin chain, and regarded me directly. "They may come to you soon," she said, meaning my children. not out of malice, out of panic. Panic often dresses up as outrage because it fears it will be mistaken for weakness. "I won't mistake it," I replied. "I know the difference between concern for me and concern for consequences." She stood, came around the desk, and surprised me by taking both my hands. "One more thing. Write yourself a sentence you can say aloud when the conversation turns messy. A sentence that belongs to you. It will keep you from wandering back into the room where you apologize for existing." I nodded. On the elevator down, I tried out a few quiet sentences under my breath, as if I were warming up my voice before a reading. "I am not punishing you. I am protecting me. I'm not closing a door. I'm choosing a room with windows. Love is presence, not an IOU. Outside, the air had that damp chill that settles into your sleeves. I tucked the folder to my chest and drove to Amy's bungalow, a small craftsman with a hummingbird feeder and a slanting porch that tilts like a smile. I didn't call first. You don't schedule certain conversations, you enter them. She opened the door before I knocked twice. "You look like you just chose yourself," she said, and stepped aside. I told her everything, start to finish, placing the folder on her kitchen table the way one places a loaf of warm bread. Offering, not burden. Amy poured coffee, the good kind she saves for when something serious happens, and read the trustee section like a woman who has graded 1,000 term papers and learned to respect the clarity of a well-drawn line. "Do you want this?" I asked. "Want it enough to fight for it when I'm not here to stubborn my way through the politics?" She closed the folder and pressed both palms to it, claiming it. "I do," she said, "because I have taught women for 30 years, and I have watched them minimize themselves to fit inside the hours other people left them. I want to stand at a doorway and say, 'This time the light is for you.'" She looked up, eyes glossy. "I'll do it in your name, and also stubbornly in my own." We talked logistics, board members, insurance, a list of women in the community who would not simply nod, but work. And then, because friendship is not all purpose, we sat back and let ourselves feel the audacity of it. I could sense Jaime in the room the way you sense an old song on the radio in another room, a presence you don't have to strain for. He had been a decent man in all the plain ways that matter. He would have said, "Good, good gal, about time." When I finally turned my phone back on in the driveway, it erupted, messages arriving in a rattled procession. "Call me, Mom. We're worried. This isn't like you. We're coming over." Panic, outrage, that old careful manipulative warmth that sounds like a blanket and behaves like a leash. I watched the screen fill, then dim, then fill again. I did not reply. Instead, I drove home and laid the folder on my dining table under the small vase of feverfew I keep there for courage. I walked from room to room, touching surfaces as if the house had taken a new breath. The kitchen counter where I learned to mix color in saucers when I couldn't afford extra palettes. The stairs where the treads dip in the center from years of small feet and laundry baskets. The corner of the living room where, last winter, I moved the television out and set up an easel because I was done with noise. At 4, a courier knocked and handed me the certified copies Mabel promised. The envelope was heavier than I expected. Words on paper have weight. I slid one copy into the fireproof box in the hall closet, and another into the drawer where I keep recipes I never make anymore, but can't throw away because they smell like a decade I once lived. The third I left on the table, visible, honest. Twilight came early, as it does here. I turned on a lamp whose shade casts a warm oval on the table, and I started a pot of soup because the body needs ordinary rituals after extraordinary choices. Halfway through chopping carrots, headlights swept across my front window, bright, then gone, then bright again as a car eased into my drive. A second set followed, then a third, doors shut with that particular conviction that belongs to people who assume they will be admitted. I put the knife down and wiped my hands on a dish towel. At the door, I could make out Patrick's shape first, tall, determined, already rehearsing his speech. Eileen's posture a step behind him, phone in her hand like a talisman, Max lingering, not yet sure whether he was the envoy of peace or the second wave. They knocked in a rhythm I know better than my heartbeat. I didn't rush. I smoothed my dress, lifted my chin, and placed one steadying hand on the back of a dining chair, as if to remind myself that I was not a witness to this life, but the author. The folder on the table lay there like a small, honest sun. I opened the door. What happened in my living room that evening would decide the shape of every holiday, every birthday, and every ordinary Tuesday for the rest of our lives, and it would prove whether love in our family was a verb or just a practiced line. The soup had just begun to simmer when the knock came again, firmer this time, followed by Patrick's voice through the oak door. "Mom, it's us. Please open up. We need to talk." For 39 years, I had responded to that voice without hesitation. Through fevers, forgotten homework, breakups, promotions, mortgages. But that evening I didn't rush. I let the silence sit between us like a wall they hadn't expected to encounter. Another knock, lighter, faster. Eileen. "Mom, we're worried. Please, this isn't like you." I almost laughed. Not like me? It was exactly like me, like the me they'd never cared to meet. Finally, Max's voice, soft but insistent. "Mom, Christina's here too. She really wants to meet you properly. We'll just talk. That's all." Something in me softened at his tone. My youngest, the one who still looked for approval even when pretending he didn't need it. But I steadied myself with the sentence Mabel had advised me to craft, the one I had whispered into the mirror all afternoon. Love is presence, not an IOU. I opened the door. They were arranged almost theatrically on my porch, Patrick in his sharp suit despite the late hour, Eileen gripping her phone like it might rescue her, Max shifting from foot to foot, and Christina, awkward, clutching a bottle of wine she clearly hoped would serve as a peace offering. "Hello, Patrick. Eileen. Max," I said evenly. Then to the young woman, "And you must be Christina. Welcome." They looked relieved, like hostages released. They filed inside, casting furtive glances at the paintings hung where the television once sat, at the sketches pinned casually to the hallway corkboard, at the absence of the woman they assumed would always be waiting. Apron tied, dinner warm. We gathered in the living room, the four of them on the sofa and armchair, me standing, still holding the dish towel. "Mom," Patrick began, his lawyer's cadence already in place. "We know last night was important to you. We made mistakes, and we want to make it right." "Make it right?" I echoed. "How?" "Dinner, maybe," Max said quickly. "The whole family. Somewhere nice. We'll celebrate properly." Eileen leaned forward. "We'll even buy one of your paintings, Mom. Hang it in my office. Clients will love it." Patrick added, "The big seascape. How much would you want? Name your price." He pulled his checkbook from his jacket, the gesture so reflexive it felt rehearsed. I looked at them, all three of my children, educated, polished, competent, and saw not malice but habit. Habit of patching over absence with money. Habit of believing that what could be purchased could also be forgiven. "You think that's what I wanted last night?" I asked quietly. "A dinner? A check? A wall in your office?" They fidgeted. Christina set the bottle of wine on the table with an embarrassed clink. "No," I said, answering my own question. "What I wanted was presence. What I wanted was for my family to sit in those chairs and see me. Not my utility, not my convenience. Me. Silence fell, the kind of silence that has a temperature. Into that stillness, the doorbell rang again. I frowned, excused myself, and opened the door to find Megan Flores standing on the porch in scrubs, her dark hair pulled into a tired bun. She held a bakery bag in one hand. "I saw the cars," she said softly. "Just wanted to check if you're all right." Her eyes flicked to the living room where my children sat in stiff confusion. "Come in," I said without hesitation. When Megan stepped into the room, the air shifted. My children stiffened, as though the presence of an outsider exposed something they'd rather keep staged. "This is Megan," I said, meeting their eyes deliberately. "My neighbor. She came to my exhibition last night. She bought the lighthouse painting." Patrick's brows drew together. "You sold to neighbors?" Megan smiled, unoffended. "I paid in installments, 3 months, worth every penny." Max looked genuinely startled. Eileen's phone slipped slightly in her hand. Christina, to her credit, offered a small smile. I turned back to them. Megan showed up. That's the difference. She didn't come because she was obligated. She came because she wanted to. That's love. Megan, sensing the tension but standing steady, added gently, "People who care show up. People who don't make excuses." Patrick bristled. "With all respect, this is a family matter. And families," Megan said firmly, "are defined by who shows up, not just by blood." The words landed like stones dropped in water. The ripples spread across the room. I folded the dish towel, placed it on the back of a chair, and finally sat down opposite my children. "You came tonight expecting the old script," I said. "You bring apologies. I bring forgiveness. You forget. I absorb. That script is finished. Last night was the final rehearsal." Eileen tried again, her voice brittle. "Mom, you're overreacting. It was one event. Life is complicated." "Life is always complicated," I interrupted, my tone sharper now. "But love is simple. It shows up." Max opened his mouth, then closed it again. For the first time in decades, I saw recognition flicker across their faces, the realization that the woman across from them was no longer content to be invisible. What I showed them next, the documents on my dining table, would unravel the story they thought they were living and replace it with one they couldn't control. I stood and crossed to the dining table. The folder lay exactly where I had left it, beneath the warm glow of the lamp. I picked it up, held it for a moment, then set it gently in the center of the coffee table in front of my children. "This," I said, "is the new shape of my legacy." Patrick reached for it first, his fingers betraying a lawyer's hunger for evidence. He scanned the first page, color draining from his face. "Mom, you changed your will?" "Yes," I said. "Everything, house, savings, policies, art, is going to the Gal Gibson Arts Foundation. For women like me, women who sacrifice themselves into silence and deserve to be seen again." Eileen snatched the folder next, flipping pages with rising panic. "This isn't legal. You can't just—" "It's completely legal," I cut in calmly. "Mabel Foran prepared it, the same attorney who managed your father's estate. She'll testify to my competence if necessary." Max leaned forward wide-eyed. But why? Because we missed one night?" "One night?" My voice cracked like a whip. "You think it was one night? Let me remind you." I listed them, each memory a stone pulled from the river of years. The birthday lunch canceled because Doris's mother had concert tickets. The Christmas where Patrick brought me leftovers on the 26th. The school play I never knew about until weeks later. The graduations where I was invited like an afterthought. Every time you excluded me, Every time you chose convenience over presence, you were writing me out of your lives, I said. Last night wasn't the exception. It was the culmination. The room was heavy now. Christina, silent until then, whispered, "If I ever skipped my mother's exhibition for a spa day, she'd never forgive me, and she'd be right." Her honesty cracked the tension like a small fissure in glass. Max shot her a wounded look, but she didn't retract her words. Patrick rubbed his temples. "Mom, please, we can do better. Just give us a chance." "You had decades of chances," I said. My voice was not angry, but it was iron. 39 years for you, Patrick. 36 for you, Eileen. 32 for you, Max. You chose who I was in your story. Optional, convenient, background. I'm choosing differently in mine. Eileen's eyes shimmered with tears. "So we're cut off? Just like that?" I shook my head. "You're not cut off from me. You're cut off from entitlement. If you want relationship, it will be on the terms of recognition. Not assumption, not inheritance. Recognition." Megan placed a steady hand on the back of my chair. Her presence was a quiet pillar. Patrick's voice, low and dangerous, asked, "And what if we fight this?" "Then you'll spend your energy fighting a mother who finally knows her worth," I answered. "And you'll lose." The silence that followed was the kind that rearranges a family forever. But what I showed them upstairs, the self-portraits they had never seen, would reveal a mother they didn't even know existed. The tension in the living room was suffocating. The folder with the will sat between us like an open wound. My children avoided each other's eyes, and yet every one of them watched me, as if waiting for a verdict. Instead of words, I stood. "Follow me," I said. Their hesitation was almost comical. Patrick frowned, calculating whether to argue. Eileen looked wary, like a consultant walking into a meeting without a briefing. Max rose first, nudging Christina to her feet. I led them upstairs, Megan following quietly, her steps steady behind mine. In the hallway, I opened the door to my bedroom and switched on the lamp. The walls glowed with color. 12 self-portraits, each one painted over the last 2 years. The first canvas showed me at 22, before marriage, before children, staring out with eyes that dared the world to stop me. Another captured me at 35, exhausted but determined, a brush in one hand, while shadows of sleeping children floated in the background. One showed me at 58, alone in an empty kitchen, a cup of tea beside a silent chair. The last was the largest, myself at 60, hair silvering, lines etched deep, but eyes alight with something fierce and alive. My children froze. The silence stretched long enough that I heard the hum of the heater, the tick of a clock on the dresser, even Megan's soft intake of breath. "Oh my God," Eileen whispered. She stepped closer, her fingers trembling near the canvas without daring to touch. "Mom, you're beautiful." "I'm alive," I corrected, my voice firm. "For the first time in decades, I am fully alive." Patrick's jaw tightened. He looked from one portrait to the next, not with admiration, but with the wary concentration of a man who only now realizes there was an entire novel written in a house where he skimmed the headlines. "You've been painting these for years?" Max asked, awe softening his voice. 2 years, I said. 2 years of remembering that I exist outside of grocery lists and babysitting schedules. 2 years of reclaiming the woman you forgot was here. They turned in unison, 3 pairs of eyes trying to reconcile the mother who folded laundry with the woman whose gaze now burned from canvas after canvas. "You never showed us," Patrick said finally, his tone almost accusing. I laughed, short and sharp. "When? Between canceled birthdays and spa days?" Between conversations where my dreams were treated as interruptions? Eileen flinched, tears threatening. I don't remember you ever asking for this. I did, I said quietly. You just never heard me. Because I asked in sighs and in silence, in small hints dropped when you were too busy. And then one day, I stopped asking. I started painting instead. Megan stepped forward then, her voice gentle but steady. Your mother showed me these yesterday. She said she wasn't sure anyone should ever see them. But I told her the truth. They're not just self-portraits. They're proof she never disappeared. Christina, quiet until now, spoke softly. She's right. If my mom had painted these, I'd never forgive myself for not knowing. The room was so heavy with realization that it almost bowed the floorboards. I walked to the largest portrait, the 60-year-old version of myself, eyes blazing, and laid my hand against the edge of the frame. This, I said, is the woman you never met, the woman who lived beneath the roles you needed me to play, the woman who learned to vanish so you could shine. She's not vanishing anymore. I turned to face them, my children, grown, successful, bewildered. What I told them next would decide whether they could walk with me into my future or whether I would walk it alone. They sat on the edge of my bed like children again, though they were decades past childhood. Their eyes flicked from portrait to portrait, as if each painting was a stranger they should already know. Mom, Max said at last, his voice breaking, what do you want from us? Tell us what to do. I don't want you to fix anything, I said. I want you to understand that some things can't be fixed. They can only be accepted or changed. Patrick ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. So what? What does that mean for us? It means you have a choice, I replied. You can see this as a crisis to manage, or you can see it as a breakthrough to respect. But whichever you choose, I won't go back to being invisible. Eileen's tears finally spilled. We didn't know you felt this way. You never asked, I cut in. My tone was gentle, but it sliced all the same. Not once in 30 years did any of you ask what I wanted beyond being your mother. The silence afterward was raw. Megan moved to stand beside me. Your mother deserves people who see her clearly, she said to them. People who show up not out of fear or guilt, but because they can't imagine missing something important to her. Patrick's voice dropped to a whisper. And if we can't? Then you accept the distance you created, I said. And I accept it too. They looked stunned, as if the ground beneath them had shifted. I let the pause hang before adding, I already have offers. A gallery in Portland wants to represent me. A residency in New Mexico has invited me. My future no longer belongs to your calendars. Christina looked at me with something close to admiration. You're leaving? I'm living, I said simply. For the first time in my adult life, I'm living. The words hung in the air, solid and undeniable. Patrick opened his mouth, but no argument came. Eileen stared at the floor. Max looked like a boy again, lost but learning. I'm not asking for your permission, I continued. I'm offering you an invitation. If you want to know me, the real me, you'll have to come to me on different terms. Presence, not excuses. Respect, not entitlement. Love, not obligation. Megan touched my arm, steadying me. And if you can't, I added, then you'll have made your choice, and I'll have made mine. No one spoke. Outside the window, the garden glowed faintly under the porch light. My flowers, daffodils, tulips, a stubborn rose bush, had waited patiently through winter's dark. Now they stretched upward, fragile but fierce, toward the promise of spring. I looked at them, and I knew. I was those flowers. After years of cold, after decades of shadow, I was reaching for the light. I turned back to my children, my voice calm, resolute. I am the protagonist of my own story, I said, and I will never disappear again. The silence that followed was not absence. It was space. Space for them to decide whether they would grow with me or watch me bloom without them.